gave him back his red pants. 10 out of 10. Okay, so kidding around, but also sort of not. That the red shorts, red trunks, whatever you want to call them, it's kind of emblematic that Superman is a perfect version of what it wants to be. Not as a franchise starter. I'm not super invested right now in a review here. The launch of the DC universe, continuity, what this means for that, but as how it works as a lived-in superhero genre film, specifically one about Superman with a bigger world and how that gives him context. Yes, this is a movie full of characters, but they aren't characters that feel like they're there to launch stuff or tease their own stuff, even if that's eventually what they do with them. As context, yes, there are other superheroes, supervillains, super stuff in this movie, and what it's doing is establishing this whole concept for Superman. This is a world where there's been 300 years of what they're calling metahumans, because that's DC's word for the people with superpowers concept. So in this movie, everyone is already familiar with superheroes, super teams, villains, monsters, gods, aliens, etc. Superman, who we're told showed up about 3 years ago, or at least started doing Superman stuff 3 years ago, is supposed to be the different guy, not just because he's stronger, but also because he's philosophically, morally different. The other superheroes that we've seen in other DC stuff, but also that we more importantly meet here, have more corporate military theming behind what they do. They feel much more like the Avengers or previous DC movie heroes. The Justice Gang is in this, and they feel like kind of a swipe at how Marvel heroes are versus how Superman is, as characters who work for a company and operate within the bounds of US military policy, whereas Superman is like the guy who does things just because they're good. But the point is, this is all very unobtrusive to the actual plot of the film, which I'm not going to get into big spoilers of. I'll probably do other videos about this now that it's finally out. Think of it in terms of like Batman Begins, the first one. People forget that movie has, between the two versions of Ra's al Ghul, the fake out one and supposedly the real one, the multiple gangsters that he climbs the ladder of, and then Scarecrow, that movie has like 6 villains as it fakes its way out to actually Ra's al Ghul is back, and it doesn't feel obtrusive or having a too many villain problem because it's structured as a story. And this feels the same way. The Justice Gang are characters, but they feel like both world building and also getting in some digs at the competition, but also they're there because if Superman had friends or colleagues or just people he knew from work, they would also be superheroes because that's his second job. Then it basically makes sense these would be the people that he knows and would interact with. The Justice Gang are fun. Eddie Gathegi in particular gets big standout moments in this, and this is a star-making turn for an actor who has deserved a star-making turn for a while. Yes, justice for Darwin, but also he has been a really good actor who has just not caught a break in forever, and this really feels like finally someone handing this guy apart and says, I'm gonna make you the coolest goddamn guy in a movie about Superman. You get to be the coolest goddamn guy, because Superman can be awesome, not necessarily cool. Anyway, not going to get too deep into plot or spoilers, because I don't need to get into plot and spoilers to say that this is just good. And to cut to the point of it, this movie is goddamn great. It works as a human story and as a big, broad blockbuster with way over-the-top cartoon energy. I like point of reference to a lot of people that they've been using has been the DC animated universe, and in terms of writing quality, yes, yeah. But for tone, you should think more like Super Friends, definitely. Like there's a giant monster, but it ain't a Godzilla -1 or even Starro or the Leviathans from Avengers monster. It's a big, crazy gremlin, rah, I'm a monster. The dialogue is deliberately non-naturalistic. People speak in declarative sentences, use catchphrases, feel unstuck in time for certain characters because parts of the Superman universe are just like that. Superman himself is a corny ass dude who speechifies about he does good just because it's good and doesn't get why that doesn't make sense to people. David Cornsweet is better here than I think a lot of people are going to give him credit for, since he's new and he fits so well into what's basically meant to feel like a millennial coded version of Superman, exactly how everyone knows Superman is supposed to be, to the point that it almost feels like they just went out and found a Superman and just filmed the guy. And the spectacle and the action scenes are huge, but they're also clearly aware of how boring big hero fights have become over like 30 years of this shit. Like, we've seen it. So what they do here is a lot of focus on what's happening around the fights, to the civilians and people on the ground, and the collateral damage, or the avoiding of collateral damage, at least until the third act, when we can get to metahuman versus metahuman super people fight stuff. Yeah, it's easy to see the focus on collateral damage, civilians, shooting action scenes from the perspective of the humans who are seeing super people fight around them and either going, wow, that's cool, or, oh god, I'm gonna die if I stay here. You know, to see that as an answer to the very valid criticisms of Man of Steel and the Snyderverse in general in terms of the city destruction, but it also makes things more dynamic and fresh, and it informs the bigger theme of the movie, that Superman is the guy who always wants to save everyone. He doesn't want to kill anything, even the bad guys or the monsters. He saves civilians, he protects pets and small animals. The other heroes are more careless about collateral damage, they're willing to kill, and this is what makes Superman different and gets into the philosophical storyline of the film, where something happens, again, no spoilers here, that makes him question this code being his foundation, and that's brought on directly by Lex Luthor. Nicholas Hoult is great as this version of Luthor, and it's also interesting that this is maybe the first Superman movie ever that just completely dislikes its Lex Luthor. You know, the Donner version made him kind of fun. Gene Hackman, Singer, made his slick and compelling. Snyder's was kind of a vessel for not as profound as the movie thought it was, frat boy philosophy dumping. You could kind of feel the movie itself personified, nodding along like Joe Rogan, listening to some Jordan Peterson garbage like, oh wow, no way, for real? Interesting. But this version, you can tell James Gunn just hates this friggin' guy. And he's just a repository for every behavior, cultural signifier, personality trait, ideological alignment, and unsubtle real-world comparison and reference that the film is telling us are the embodiments of disgust and evil, chiefly in this case right-wing tech bros, nationalists, and the internet itself above all else. For context, what can be said of the story without revealing too much, which isn't actually that much, they have put very little of the film into the trailers, is that one of the new twists on the Superman mythology here, some of which are significantly bigger than others, and I'm curious to see the reception for, is that Gunn has actually made what feels like an immensely personal work, not only about narrative themes and topical subjects he cares deeply about, but also very personal experiences and, oh yeah, grievances of his own, specifically the use of unaccountable tech spaces to enable harassment, doxing, and reputational destruction via social media, which is where this reimagining of Luthor as tech billionaire succeeds at being topical, resonant, and actually about something beyond just a reference to an actor's previous movie. Especially as Lex's truly gonzo supervillain scheme grants Gunn the opportunity to crunch targets from dictators to toxic tweeters to paramilitary thugs to gamer chuds into one big ball of guys who deserve a super ass kicking, and I am here for it. You know, for all the lead-up chatter about this being the first true Silver Age movie, it's really not. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was definitely more of a Silver Age movie. This is more Bronze or early modern, especially in a DC context. You know, Bronze Age being the 70s to the mid-80s and Modern Age being the mid-80s to the 90s. Now, those were the eras at DC where it was defined not only by comic book weirdness, but the fusion of that comic book weirdness with thoughtful, current events-inspired storylines. Not always successfully, but it was there. And as a result, Superman feels more substantively like possibly the first significant era-redefining turn of a corner thematically for this genre in terms of how these modern mythological hero figures should or at least can be conceived, since the 1-2 punch of Nolan's Batman and the MCU bullseyeing the post-9/11, post-Bush but ongoing war on terror zeitgeist by making superheroes the troops, which in turn has been the running allegory we've been living under for almost 20 years now, and that most attempts to actually get out from under have either failed or only half succeeded at. This is now doing something very different and also engaging critically with those previous versions in a way that feels big and real. And yeah, circling back to Iron Man and the Dark Knight, pretty early on I got the sense that I might be witnessing in Superman the beginning of the next 20 years of superhero movies and maybe big Hollywood movies, period. And if so, I welcome it, because that future is colorful, corny, achingly sincere, and has big things on its mind. Gunn's Superman is deceptively light and bouncily paced, but it also might actually be the first true topical blockbuster of its era. Anti-ICE, anti-genocide, anti-Trump, anti-disinformation, anti-internet toxicity, anti-Elon Twitter in particular, and passionately anti-isolationist, as the wider argumentative arc literally tips between multiple characters arguing different flavors of, you know, Superman can't just fly around the world stopping bad guys just because they're bad, versus Superman's take on the matter, which is, yeah, okay, but what if I still did? 'Cause I'm gonna. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this is a perfect 10 out of 10. Yes, because they did the shorts, and I said I'd do that if they did, and the numbers don't mean shit anyway, but for real, Superman is a masterwork of expertly made blockbuster optimism when we needed that the most. It's the ideal Superman movie, really the ideal superhero movie for this moment in time in all the best possible ways. If there's justice in the world, which, fair question, this will be the new pinnacle by which the medium should be judged. All along, I have said James Gunn had all the tools at his disposal to save the day for all of this, and he has done everything he possibly can better than anyone else could. Now it's up to the audience.